Chris Jericho is finally opening up about his 2016 backstage altercation with Brock Lesnar. So we'll see what he had to say. We'll also take a look at some comments from Ezekiel, a turned down pitch, and much more. Let's start things off with this Chris Jericho and Brock Lesnar story. For this situation, we gotta head back to summer 2016 and the main event of that Summerslam event. The main event of that night was Brock Lesnar versus Randy Orton. That was a big match for that year's SummerSlam. Things started to go off the rails, at least for Chris Jericho, where he started to see Brock Lesnar hitting Randy Orton with these vicious elbows to the head that was obviously meant to burst Orton wide open to bleed. That was planned to be a part of the match, and Brock Lesnar was strictly instructed to bust Randy Orton open with those elbows. But Chris Jericho was not made aware of that fact. Chris Jericho was going crazy backstage, asking everyone that he ran into if he knew if that was planned or not. Jericho couldn't get a solid answer for anyone backstage, which gave him a reason to believe that Brock Lesnar went off script with those elbows. So as a result, thinking that those hard elbows were unplanned, Chris Jericho waited for Brock Lesnar right behind the entrance curtain to confront him about doing that to Randy Orton. It was an entire confrontation with both men yelling and screaming at each other right in front of each other's faces, nose to nose. It was noted in all the reports from back then that everyone, including Triple H, got involved to try to break Jericho and Lesnar up. The only one that was able to break up the confrontation was Vince McMahon himself, once he told Jericho that he was the only one who told Brock Lesnar to hit Randy Orton with those elbows, and how it was all part of the original plan for the match. Once Chris Jericho got his confirmation answer from the boss himself, he cooled down and everything was settled. Now obviously, cameras weren't rolling backstage, and the only person who saw all this go down was everyone who was backstage. And now, nearing the 6-year anniversary of the backstage confrontation, Chris Jericho is opening up about this story and telling his full side of the story of what went down that night in 2016 with Brock Lesnar backstage. Chris Jericho had this to say while speaking on the True Geordie podcast, quote, "He was doing a match with Randy Orton and he was basically butchering him with elbows to the head. I didn't know if it was planned or not. No one would tell me. Wrestling is a hard-hitting sport, but elbows to the side of the head can hurt you. When he was hitting him with the elbows, if this is real, then it is BS. But if it is called, it is still BS because he is taking liberties and it is ticking me off. I was in Gorilla and I was angry about it. He came back and saw me and saw I was angry about it and wanted to challenge me. We got into a bit of an issue. I was like, F this guy. I don't know how big he is. I will take him on. I will fight to the death and stand up for what I believe in, to the death. I was nose to nose with the guy and he is there laughing and saying things that would get him canceled. I was like, I'm gonna bite his nose off. I see this big nose in front of me, and if he takes a swing at me, I'm not saying this as a tough guy. I'm literally going to bite his nose off and see how tough he is. Triple H tried to break it up, and we both told him to F off, which is hilarious. Then Vince got involved and basically broke it up and told me that he had told Brock to do that. No one else would say anything before that, but that was all down to Vince and Randy and Brock and whatever. But when it got down to the confrontation, it was real. Had it gone to the next step, he might have broke my face, but I will bite his nose off, end quote. So that was the entire story of what happened that night back in 2016. When it comes to the events of this story, reports appear to have this story completely correct. Everything Jericho was saying basically is what we heard from those reports all those years ago. Karrion Kross's main roster run didn't live up to what fans were hoping to see from the former NXT World Champion. He was treated like a massive deal in NXT, with such a high-quality presentation with Scarlett, but he randomly appeared one day on Raw in 2021 to make his main roster debut, and Scarlett, as well as his big presentation, was all gone. He would lose his debut match on Raw while he was still NXT champion, and never got on track on the main roster. He went through several gear changes on Raw, but things still weren't clicking until he was unfortunately released a handful of months later. Kross is now opening up about his experiences working with the WWE writers. He said that the writers are great to work with and are always open to a lot of fun and creative ideas. What stops all those ideas from happening is that the buck stops with Vince McMahon. He makes the final call if something will make it to television or not. So most of the time, we don't get to see what the writers and superstars come up with because it gets vetoed by Vince McMahon a majority of the time. Kross had this to say while speaking with NBC Sports on his pitch to bring back the corporate ministry, quote, "I had ideas about bringing back the corporate ministry. That was one of my final ideas that I had. I had a series of writers on board who thought it was a very good idea. I thought pitching those ideas would be cool because there's some nostalgia to it. You know, with all these crazy conspiracy theories that are always going around about esoteric business and stuff like that, and cults and evil companies and stuff like that, I thought there would be a tasteful way to fictionalize that type of stuff and put it back on TV with a nostalgic twist. The problem was all these ideas that we would come up with together, and whether they had awesome ideas for me or they would ask me about my own ideas. They all have to go through one person. If that one person feels like it doesn't resonate to them, they don't make sense, or they're just not in the realm of how they particularly see things going and in entertaining people, then they're just gonna go throw it out the window." End quote. So Kross was onto something there by wanting to bring back a new version of that all-time classic faction. And some of the writers were on board, but Vince McMahon appears to be the one that turned it down. Ezekiel, the younger brother of Elias, has been making waves on Raw ever since that night after WrestleMania 38. Zeke was recently speaking with KTAL News and was questioning on why he didn't come to the main roster through the NXT process. He had this to say in response to that question, quote, "I'm very blessed. I was able to skip the whole NXT process, get right to the main roster. I think I'm growing leaps and bounds, way more than I would anywhere else. I'm getting to mix it up with the top talent in the world on Monday Night Raw every week, and sometimes SmackDown. That's definitely where I want to be. I would love to go one-on-one with my brother. I think that would be a dream match, me and him, in front of the world. That would be incredible. On top of that, Shawn Michaels was always my favorite wrestler. That is a dream match for sure." End quote. And that is very true. The Ezekiel character did skip the NXT process, and that's something you don't usually see. The only young newcomer in recent years to skip NXT was Dominic. But what are your thoughts on today's stories? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe with all notifications on, and leave a like if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, guys.